Let's go first to Jotam Confino, who's Middle East correspondent and author, joining us from a town just north of Tel Aviv. And if I can start, Jotam, how is the local media portraying events overnight? Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. So I would say that Israeli media are quite surprised that it's happening now, mainly because an Israeli negotiations team came back from Cairo yesterday, and most Israelis were under the impression that negotiations were still ongoing, even though they were stuck, they were still ongoing. And also, this decision by Netanyahu comes just 2 days after he decided to sack the intelligence chief. So I think it caught a lot of Israelis by surprise. And, of course, the families of the hostages are furious. They've said it's essentially a death sentence for the remaining hostages, what just happened.
Do you think that the Israeli government feels that this is going to actually bring Hamas to the table? Because it's highly unlikely. History shows that to be likely the exact opposite, isn't it?
I think you're right. I don't think that they believe that this is going to bring Hamas back to the table. Of course, they have to say that because that's the official explanation for this. But I think their main goal right now is just to go to war against Hamas and to eradicate, if they can, what's left of Hamas. Because estimates in Israel show that Hamas currently has around 25,000 fighters and Islamic Jihad has 5,000. That is quite a large number of people inside Gaza who still belong to the terror groups that Israel said they were going to eradicate.
What's the ultimate game plan for Benjamin Netanyahu, do you imagine, Jotam?
The ultimate game plan for Netanyahu is always to stay in power. That goes without saying. That's his first priority, and it shows that with all of his decisions that he's made in the past 17 months. Because if he were to listen to the interests of the Israeli people, the majority say continue the ceasefire, go to second phase, and get the remaining hostages out. He's chosen not to do that. He's listening to three actors: his constituents, his hardcore nationalist members of the security cabinet, who threatened with toppling him if he continues the ceasefire, and of course Donald Trump, because he's got full backing from Trump. So he's listening to those three actors or players, and that is his goal. His goal is to just stay in power and to see if he can eradicate Hamas as much as possible.
Are we aware if warnings were given to the civilian population in Gaza?
I'm not aware of that, which is also unusual because Israel has, even though it's been quite relentless in its bombings, it has always given a heads up to civilians to leave. And we don't know how many of those 300 who are civilians, we don't know how many of them are members of Hamas. But as far as I'm concerned, they weren't given a heads up last night. But this morning, Israel called on people in northern and southern Gaza, specific places, to evacuate because the bombings will continue.
Lastly, if no warning was given to the civilian population, that's an ugly look for Israel here, isn't it?
It is an ugly look, but, regardless of what Israel does, it's always going to come out looking bad, because Israel is right now seen as the aggressor, and Israel will be held accountable for this. So even if they were given a heads up, the civilians, I don't think it would have changed much in terms of how the international system is going to look at this.
Grateful for your input. Jotam Confino, thank you. Middle East correspondent joining us from a town just north of Tel Aviv. Listening, Hen Mazzig, who's an Israeli author and co-founder of the Tel Aviv Institute. He's joining us also from Israel. Thank you for coming on the line. Your reaction to what you've heard overnight?
I'm not a fan of Netanyahu, but I think Hamas really holds the keys to ending this war. And every time there's a chance to end this, they reject it. According to Witkoff and everyone else that was involved in the negotiation, Hamas has made unreasonable demands from the negotiation team. I don't want this war. I don't want it for the hostages. I don't want it for the Palestinian civilians or Israeli civilians. I want it to end, but I know that we have to pressure Hamas to end it. And as long as the international... Yeah,
Mr. Mazzig, how will this help end it?
I think that the pressure might push Hamas to making concessions. I just know that there was a block in the negotiations, according to everyone that have been involved from the American side. So I think that there is a definitely need to do something to end this.
But isn't it? If you look at what we've learned over the last 2.5 years or so, Hamas hasn't responded to this at all so far. Why might it change, Mr. Mazzig?
I think that there's really no other option for Israel. I mean, we're seeing the hostages being abused. We got babies in coffins being paraded around the streets of Gaza. We saw hostage ladies. Again, I don't want this. I don't think that we need this. But I also want to remind the audience and everyone that is listening that that Hamas has been violating this ceasefire agreement. And just to remind you that in February 20th, they had bus bombings in Israel, several buses being exploded. They have sent terrorists throughout this ceasefire agreement. They have violated it throughout. So I don't think there was really a ceasefire. We're just seeing Israel retaliating and doing something to try and pressure them. I'm not sure that this is the right thing. I'm hopeful that something would change, but definitely there's no any horizon to ending it with negotiations right now.
Well, I share your hope. And if it is the right thing, what would we expect to happen next, Mr. Mazzig?
My hope is that by eliminating, and they have eliminated at least 10 senior Hamas officials overnight in those bombing attacks, including the head of the Hamas government in the Gaza Strip. So my hope is that it would make them, it would pressure them to come back to negotiations, to understand that they can't just carry.
You don't see
that
that the US has to do something now, perhaps?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the U.S. is involved, and I think the fact that that Trump is a president and there's much more stronger pro-Israel government there might really pressure Hamas to thinking that they can't rely on the U.S. government to calm things down. I think I think Hamas is realizing that they don't have the upper hand anymore.
Grateful for your time this morning. Thank you. Look after yourself. Hen Mazzig, Israeli author, co-founder of the Tel Aviv Institute, joining us again from Israel. Well, that's the background to it. Apparently, it's to try and bring Hamas back to the table. It hasn't worked for 2.5 years. I can't quite see why it might now. And it would appear no warnings given to the civilian population.